dog days of August, Thursday, August 16th, and what better time than to be talking about America, I think it's still America's pastime, baseball, and particularly in terms of women's baseball. I am just, excited to be your host today, Diane Gatsis Havinga. I'm excited to have Peggy Kellers here, who everyone knows Peggy. She's not only a resident, or is a resident, but she's, of course, the resident council president. But more importantly, she's kind of my kindred spirit because she used to play ball. And before we get started, go ahead, Peggy. Go ahead and stand up. I need you to see this shirt because this is just, I'm right there with her. And it's a woman's place is at home and at first and at second and at shortstop and at third and in the outfield and pitching and catching. And I think that's the truest statement of all. And Peggy, you used to be a catcher.
Yes, and that's why my friends who get creative with gifts for me gave me this.
So let's talk a little bit about I think most people are familiar with the movie, which we just saw that brief clip with Tom Hanks saying, there's no crying in baseball. And we use that when I play ball all the time. And I was telling Peggy before you went on the air, I said, I don't think I ever cry. I came close to it. I know I took a bat and chased my sister around the ball field because I wanted to kill her because she was teasing me. But I don't think I ever cried. And so people from that movie, which came out in the late 80s.
No, actually July 92.
Okay,
yeah.
There you go. July 92. And of course is on continuously on any of the cable channels. Mentioned or talked about the establishment of the women's major league baseball leagues and the creation and how they had all got started. And then from there, how they went into the Hall of Fame. So let's talk a little bit about your background. How did you get started with playing ball?
Well, I grew up in Stratford, Connecticut, and there was a 4-team league when I was 9 within our little community. So 4 women were coaching, and we just started playing, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity at that time. And then our recreation center in town had a junior girls team and then a women's team. So they invited me to play on the junior girls team, and then after about a year, I guess people recognized my talent because then they brought me up to the senior women's team, which the youngest was 19 and I was about 13. So we did a lot of traveling in the area and played fast pitch. And then I was invited to play on a team in New Haven, Connecticut that was in the same league as the team from the national and world championship team that I played on for the majority of my career. So when I was 14, I was invited to play on that team, and that kind of got me started, and it also exposed me to the Rebestis Breakettes, which is the team I played for then for 11 years. And they're national champions. 7 of my 11 years we were national champions, and the other 4 we were runners-up, so I cried then. And then we were world champions, and we were Pan American gold medalists.
And let's put this in perspective again. Let's emphasize the year we're talking about.
In the 60s and early 70s.
Okay, so we're still talking about pre-Title IX.
Yes.
And Title IX, for those, just to remind people, was that landmark decision that people, they put in a little kind of paragraph about women's athletes, athletics, and and no one really thought too much about it, but it just has revolutionized athletes, women athletes and athletics for women all over the world, but especially here obviously in the United States. So
yeah, so that was passed by Congress in 1972. Schools had to around 1978 to what we call comply, and they were slack on that. It was difficult because it meant budget and finances. But for example, then when I was playing, I did not have high school sports, which is unheard of today. So I had a classmate who was an excellent swimmer from Puerto Rico. The boys' swim coach wanted her to be able to compete in the swimming, and the boys' basketball coach wanted me to be able to compete on the boys' team because I was also good in basketball. So they took it to whoever the powers to be were, I imagine a league, and it was denied.
But that was pretty revolutionary back then to
Yes.
have a male coach say, no, I want this
Yes.
girl to be on the team. Now, I'm a little bit younger than you. I'm a lot younger. No, and I remember in high school, we did not have any, we had what they called intramurals. And I'm sure most of our women residents would remember. You had intramurals, maybe. And there were certain sports that you could play. You know, there was swimming, and we did have a pool, indoor pool in my high school. So we had swimming, and I'm going to say probably diving, because we did have a high dive. I know there was gymnastics, soccer, field hockey, and tennis. Now, there may have been even fencing back then, but I don't really remember if there was softball. I think there probably was, because growing up in the Midwest, you know, especially Chicago, we played slow pitch 16-inch. So I grew up playing that. But there really wasn't any, you know, organized sports. And basically in college, I don't remember, you know, if there were women, you know, I didn't go that way, so I didn't really pay that much attention. So, and my sisters, we all played sports. During the summer, we played, like I said, softball. And tennis. And my one sister, my younger sister, my older sister, she was a really good tennis player. And she challenged, in the summer there was a boys tennis team that would compete. And she challenged the coach. And he would not put her on the team. And she took it to the city council and was able to finally play tennis with the boys. So your parents must have been very supportive of this, because
They were. And my dad and mom were really good about, I have an older brother and a younger sister, about recognizing each of our talents and trying to foster those. So I remember my dad having some concerns, especially when I made the team from New Haven, and then with the Breakettes. They had a private conversation in the living room where I was excused so that they could talk about, I guess, some real issues about, hey, this kid is 14 or 15 and she's going to be with women 19 and older, and, you know, are there parameters, or is there some guidelines, you know, that kind of thing. So my dad was very protective in that way, but also very encouraging to be able to foster my talents and interests.
So tell me a little bit about how the women, when you did join the team, how they treated you and reacted to the fact that here was this kid who's going to come and play with them.
They were really good. They probably were like mother eagles, which I didn't want as a 14 or 15-year-old, right? But they were very respectful of me. They were very aware of my age. If they would go out after a game and they would have a beer, you know, they knew I was getting Coke or whatever. And I think they kind of shepherded me, and that was really good. So I really respect the women that played in that same era with me. You'd laugh because I was a rookie then, not because of my age. The first one on the team, you're a rookie, first year. So I had to iron uniforms, polish spikes. Today it would probably be considered hazing. But back then, you know, the rookies had the dirty duty, especially on the road. So road trips, we would be washing uniforms after a game and then getting them ready for the next day and doing whatever, carrying bats out of the ballpark and that kind of thing. So that was kind of fun, because then when I was no longer a rookie, then, you know, you were passing that along.
Those chores didn't seem too bad, considering what they could have been, I'm assuming. Now, did you have a regular uniform, or were you back to, you know, kind of going back to the All-American League, which, let's just kind of touch base. So that league got started by Wrigley,
Yes.
who was the owner of the Chicago Cubs, and of course Wrigley gum back at that time, you know, the juicy fruit and spearmint and whatever gums they were. And it was to help fill the stadiums when you know, the boys went off to war. What are we going to do? And he came up with the idea of having women come and play ball with in the stadiums. Now, my understanding was that it was really more of a Midwest league, which I thought was interesting. Now, obviously, baseball hadn't really expanded out west to California yet, but there were, as you know, there were Eastern leagues. Do you have any idea why it just was more of a Midwest phenomenon?
Part of it could have been the convenience, because you travel to games, and so, for example, in Racine and Rockford, Illinois, you're going, you know, you have a reasonable distance, right? You're traveling by bus. Whereas if you went to New Jersey or New York, it would be much more of a trip, as Major League Baseball at that time experienced, because I'm not sure too many were flying to those games. And so it was pretty much Midwest. There were 15 teams initially. There were over 600 players. And some of these women had never played organized sports before. They were, you know, recruited off the farm or out of the business or that kind of thing. Several of them were married and had husbands who were serving overseas. And of course, we know that there were many Major League Baseball players who I'm very grateful to them for serving our country. So they left their career for that time, went over and fought in World War II, and then returned. So yes, Wrigley had this vision of how can we provide some entertainment, how can we also maybe occupy some of the stadiums that now are vacant. And the big key in the whole picture for the women was femininity was the key.
And the way they looked in dress,
yes,
and the outfits. So we do have a clip of how women had to dress. It wasn't, you know, a long slack. So, and this is from the League of Our Own, but we also have some actual historical footage. So they were wearing skirts. Can you imagine playing in a skirt?
Well, many of our women residents would recognize those uniforms because we used to wear them in physical education class.
That's right. I remember.
And they have bloomers underneath the skirt so that, you know, it was more discreet. But it was a one-piece uniform, and that's what they wore at the time. I think later on they may have gone to the regulation baseball uniform, but initially it was that. And then the other aside to that was after they practiced, they were enrolled in a charm school. So what you saw in the clips or in the movie, you know, they're learning to drink tea as a feminine image with their pinky up. They walked with books on their shoulders so you weren't, you know, just kind of lumbering along. And it was anything to create the atmosphere of these women are women. What they do in between the lines, they're athletes. But they wanted to create the feminine piece initially. And then because the talent was so good as the league matured, then fans would come not just for the attraction and the entertainment, but then they would come because this was serious baseball.
And I like I said, I can't imagine playing in a dress or a skirt, but you reminded me, when I was in high school, yeah, we had the ugliest uniforms we had to wear. And I just remember when my girls went to school and they were given shorts and T-shirts, and I was like, wow. And they couldn't understand, what are you talking about, Mom? I'm like, well, you know. And God forbid you had anything other than regular gym shoes. There were no...
Yes, no metal cleats.
There were no metal cleats, and you just, and now I would not get on a ball field without wearing cleats.
Yes.
Just would not do it. But
so, and you asked me earlier about what our uniform was like. And we had short shorts. And my particular team, the Breakettes, they were, we had satin uniforms that were homemade. And we had a tail that came down underneath and buttoned near our crotch so that it never came out and we never looked messy. It was perfectly comfortable. I mean, you didn't even know it was there. And actually, it was a pretty good idea. You never had to worry about tucking in your shirt. But often, because of the short shorts, and of course we had, you know, a good physique, we would get some really good people coming to our games for that, and then when they would see our abilities, you know, that would kind of transcend. Our men's team, for example, didn't come close to the crowds that we would draw. They had the regular baseball type uniforms and they were very good. But for some reason, the mystique of having women play in that era was just an attractive and entertainment piece. And then when they saw how good we were, they would see national championship, world championship level softball, you know, they were sold.
So did you play, besides that local, like regional area, did you play teams from across the states or even like Canada?
Yes, we played all across the states. We had a league that was kind of on the northeast, so the furthest was in Massachusetts and the furthest south was Orlando, Florida, and then everywhere in between, with the exception of the mid-Atlantic states and, you know, North South Carolina. They were big into slow pitch softball for women. So we played in Baltimore and so forth. And so those were always home and away series. And then we went out on usually a 2-week road trip. So we'd take a 2-week road trip to the Chicago area one year. We'd go into the California area in another year. And then every August was our national tournament. So if you were defending champions, you were eligible without having to go through a regional, and if you were hosting, you were eligible. And so I only remember one time that we had to qualify through the regional route. But in addition to all of that, we would play on military bases overseas just to encourage the men and, you know, entertain them. We went around the world trip to go to Australia for the very first World Championship. And then they extended that, again, all goodwill nature. We're trying to expose the sport and so forth. And then we spent quite a bit of time in Europe training the teams from Holland and Italy at that time to improve their skills, because if we're going to go for the Olympics, we have to have a whole network of strong teams who will be able to play in the Olympics and not just have it dominated by, say, Asia and the United States.
So you didn't find that wherever you went, women weren't playing softball or baseball at that time?
Well, we intentionally targeted areas where they were playing softball. We didn't play baseball, and I didn't know of any baseball leagues at that time, because in the women's professional baseball, that ended in 1954. And I believe after that, there were kind of smatterings of let's start this again, let's see if it can work. And it never took hold for a lengthy period of time. Very interesting, as I prepared for this show today, in 2018, this year, there's a new resurgence for Women Professional Baseball League. In fact, you can register online. I don't know what it means, but I know they're trying to get sponsors. And as you know, Diane, the sponsorship is the key, and television coverage. And if you have both of those, you can get a decent league going. And I believe that ultimately their goal of this new league is to get a woman or women into Major League Baseball.
That would be something. Hopefully it will happen in our lifetime,
Maybe.
wouldn't it? So, so you fell short of the Olympics because they didn't bring women's softball or baseball into the Olympics until really actually quite recent.
96. Yes, so when we were doing these world championships, it was supposed to be the next step to the Olympics. Well, you learn a lot of patience when you're working with the Olympics. So our first opportunity was, we were an exhibition sport in the Winnipeg Pan American Games. So we are all in the category of the Olympic family, and the United States won the gold medal that year. And then we thought the next step would be the next round of Olympics. Well, from 1967 to 1996 was the span that we waited. And it was difficult. We felt like we were knocking at the door, but you have to realize that the political scene within the Olympic Selection Committee is quite challenging. So the European bloc, for example, because they weren't strong in softball, they were not going to support the softball program coming in to the Olympic Games. And we had Asia, who was very strong. We had Australia and New Zealand, who were very strong, and Canada, who was very strong. So there was a lot of manipulation behind the scenes, and you have to also be practical. Let's say that London, for example, when they hosted the Olympics, which was the last time softball and baseball were in it, here they're, you know, promising all of these venues. Well, London doesn't have softball. So now they're building a softball venue, and after the Olympics, what does it do? You know, do you convert it to soccer, which over there is called football? I don't know. And so you have to understand that the practical piece of it is, yes, we can build a beautiful football, soccer arena, but what about this softball, baseball thing? They're so unique. So that's part of the piece. It's not just all political as far as trying to keep the United States from dominating a sport.
Let's go back to you actually playing. I'm curious about you're a catcher. How did you decide to, and this is Peggy's, this is your original mitt?
Well,
or one
I
of
had to change my mitt every
Sure.
year because of the wear and tear.
Uh-huh. So why catching? Why did you decide to be a catcher?
Okay, catching was by mistake. I was at a game with the New Haven team, and one of our catchers was injured, one had to work, and the other one couldn't play that night. So the coach said, is there anyone who is willing to catch? And I was second base at the time. I was pretty quick and pretty sharp. So 15 years old, and I raised my hand. And so, yeah, yay. So I became a catcher, and that night I was catching for the wildest pitcher on our team. And I said, the only thing that I need going into this game is, could you have someone pitch to me when there's a batter swinging and missing, so that I can get used to catching and not close my eyes? Well, anyway, I must have done really well, because Kathy, this wildest pitcher, she liked the way I handled it. And of course, I was young and quick. So I wasn't letting anything go by, and then that was the beginning of my career. So usually I played second base or catcher, and then when the big team from Stratford, Connecticut, when we played against them and they saw me catching, and of course catchers can basically write their own ticket, you know, if they have any skill at all, then they were attracted to me because of my catching.
So what's the hardest part, do you think, of being a catcher?
Well, besides taking foul tips off my thighs or other parts of my body, just being able to lead or control each pitcher who has a different temperament and a different set of skills. And you're calling the game based on the batter that's up, based on the pitcher's skills, based on a number of factors, including what's going on during the game. And you're working with some pitchers that can be pretty headstrong. So you have to be equally tough, but yet not overpowering, so that they're not going to listen. And that was my biggest challenge when I first started catching, learning how to call the pitches and then learning how to handle these star pitchers. Two of them were the greatest in the world at the time.
It must have been a lot of homework. I mean,
yes.
I mean, I'm thinking, you know, I play ball, I go in, I play the game, we go out for a beer. When I was younger, we'd go out for beer floats, you know. Not a big deal, you didn't really think about it, you just played. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking of all the positions, probably pitcher and catcher
yes.
are the ones that aren't just going out for that beer, they have
right.
homework to do.
In fact, we weren't allowed to go out for beer after the game, but that's okay. Remember, I was under 21.
That's right. Different rules.
So what I did to learn how to call pitches for each of my pitchers, when I wasn't playing, I charted every batter from each team and every pitch. And it actually became a pretty neat system for our manager, because he would ask me, how is Donna doing? How many pitches has she thrown? And then I would know which pitches, which types of pitches batters swung at. So I began to see strengths and weaknesses of the batters. So the night before we were playing a team, especially ones that I knew, I would memorize the lineup and go through it in my head and go through the pitcher that was coming up against those batters, and then how I was going to handle that. So there was a lot of mental preparation, and even during the game, being able to adjust to whatever the pitcher was doing that particular night.
We're unfortunately running out of time, but I do want to touch base on batting.
Okay.
And I want you to tell us one story about when you were a batter. And it could be good or bad, or what that you remember, and just.
Okay. So I probably was comparable to Babe Ruth.
Okay.
In softball, because I had some of the most strikeouts. And he did too. He also had some of the most home runs, but you know, we didn't have that kind of a situation. We often played in open ballparks. So that was one kind of egg on my face. And then the other thing, I was very fast. So usually I was the 8th or the 9th batter, and I could run out a ground ball. So, and then I was also a very good bunter. And so I would often be able to advance my teammates so that then the first, second, and third batters were coming up and being able to get them into score.
And what would be your most thrilling memory of your career that you can share with us?
My last game. We were in extra innings in the national tournament, and we had already played 15 innings to win the first game, and then we had to go into the second game, and the winner of that game won the nationals. And we were in the 10th inning, and we had a runner on third, and I was up, and I hit what you call a Texas leaguer, which was a little pop-up between the infield and the outfield, and I was safe at first, and the winning run came in, and we won nationals. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was my last game, because then I had to retire because I had 2 shoulder operations and it didn't respond.
That's a great way to go out.
It is.
I
like it.
Wow. Well, wow, Peggy, this has been just wonderful to chat with you, and I know we could continue to talk and reminisce, but I do want to leave our audience with the fact that really Title IX changed everything. We're seeing it today. It opened up the doors not only for professional athletes, but daughters all over the world. I mean, my 2 daughters think nothing about sports. I mean, they always played it, and I have one daughter who plays on like 2 or 3 soccer teams, and it's not a big deal, you know, and they don't, I think they kind of know a little bit about the history, but they really don't. And I'm not sure that legislation would be passed today. In fact, I'm pretty sure it probably won't because of the way things are, but thank God it was. And there are a lot of women who probably would have had different paths if things were different back then. You know, the old, you're not supposed to sweat.
Yeah, we glow.
Right, no glowing, and most people know in the morning I'm glowing all the time. So thank you so much for sharing. And remember, a woman's place is at home, and all the other positions from base people to catching.